Welcome back, Ronin Renegades. I am Lupine Fiasco, this is Daily Fi Gameplay, and today we are going to look at the spicy tech simmering in Daniele Frattarelli's World Championship Top 8 Fi deck. I would be remiss if at the start of this video I did not briefly acknowledge that Icelander achieved Living Legend status at Battle-Hardened Wallonia this past weekend. With Ice no longer part of the classic constructed format, the meta will almost certainly change, and we as Fi players will need to adapt. I need some time to consider the implications of Icelander's LL, but you should absolutely expect a video about it soon. For now, let's talk about Daniele. Daniele made an impression by slicing his way through the Swiss round of the World Championships in Barcelona, picking up even more wins than World's champ Alex Abreu. His run through Barcelona was cut short by the brick wall of Easton Douglas's Pistol Dash deck, but he still caught a lot of attention in the Fi community and the general viewing audience for some of his unusual card choices. While Daniele's list contains many known staples of the Fi deck and a few old favorites of the channel, Bleed Out and Censor are two very exciting inclusions that I'd like to talk about. As we move through the rest of the Bright Lights meta, preparing for heavy hitters and adjusting to the absence of Icelander, how can we adjust our list to incorporate this new spice? Starting with Bleed Out, I would have never considered it as a card that would find its way into a World's Top 8 deck. Upon seeing it, I even wondered if it had made its way to the LSS site by mistake, like Rise Up taking the spot of Searing Emberblade in the official deck list. It took listening to Daniele's deck tech on the Tales of Wraith YouTube channel to really understand his logic behind the inclusion, and I find it to be very sound. In Daniele's list, Bleed Out takes the place of Ravenous Rabble, which all Fi players know to be extremely fickle. As a 0 for 4 with Go Again, Ravenous Rabble is one of the best cards in our deck. As a 0 for 2 with Go Again, Rav Rabble is one of the worst. Bleed Out is consistently a 4-power attack, with its 0 cost being reliant on us doing what our deck already wants to do, attacking with harmonized Kodachis. As a 0 for 4, Bleed Out presents a valuable breakpoint for triggering Mask of Momentum, and as a 1 for 4, it is only slightly worse than our powerful cards Mounting Anger and Bittering Thorns. And speaking of Bittering Thorns, don't let our typical play pattern of Kodachi Breakpoint trick you into misreading Bleed Out's text. The cost is discounted by the damage dealt by Kodachis this turn, not the number of hits. So, if you hit with a Bittering Thorns, then attack and hit with a 2-power Kodachi, your Bleed Out is now free. Keeping this in mind will make some otherwise awkward hands extremely playable, and depending on your list, there are other ways to manipulate the power of your Kodachis in our benefit as well. On a last note, it should go without saying that Bleed Out is unplayable with Searing Emberblade, and you'll want to board it out along with your Kodachis when necessary. Moving on to Censor, this is an extremely interesting card that has the potential to really screw with your opponent's turn. We've seen the power of Breaking Point as a chain ender after your opponent has already committed to blocks, or as a 1 for 5 to threaten Mask of Momentum with just it and a blue in hand. In this same vein, Censor has the same utility while also adding an on-hit to this 3-link chain. Restricting your opponent's ability to play the best card in their deck can really turn a game around, especially if your opponent was basing their turn around doing so. Did Rhinar plan his turn around converting yellow and blue pitch cards into 5 damage Go-Again attacks? He isn't after you name Bloodrush Bellows with Censor. Was Bravo intending to use his blue pitches to dominate a Starstruck? Have fun with your hammer boy. Getting the most out of Censor will require more precise knowledge of your opponent's deck and the strongest cards in it, and possibly some soul reads on your part. Going back to Bravo, he has multiple crush effects that can really ruin our day, so keeping track of his pitch and discard becomes even more important when deciding which one of these attacks to name with Censor. Hedging against the most devastating possible effect may be your best call in this case. Of course, blocking Censor is the easiest way to stop the on-hit, but you're taking cards or armor from your opponent when they do so. Potentially turning your opponent's big 4 or 5 card power turn into a neutered 2-card weapon attack is big game, especially when it just takes 2 cards of our own. Let's take a moment here to look at Daniele's utility blues. With Iyslander achieving Living Legend, in my opinion, Energy Potion is mostly homeless. It can fuel a big Art of War turn by providing quote-unquote banked resources, and with Daniele's 1-cost count sitting so high, I can certainly see how a reservoir of energy would be useful. For my style of play and deck building, which is more akin to Alex Aguirre, Energy Potion was only ever Blizzard and channeling Frigid Protection. Until the next Ice Hero releases and these cards are back on the table, I feel comfortable shelving my Epots. Concealed Blade, on the other hand, is a card that I played with previously, and Ancestral Empowerment but blue can be very powerful. It enables your Kodachis in the pitch zone, and in your hands with more than 1 blue, it's an extra point of damage at worst and a Mask of Momentum trigger at best. That said, it shares many weaknesses with Ancestral Empowerment but red. It can often be a dead draw from Art of War, it doesn't affect cards like Phoenix Flame or Enlightened Strike, and unlike Ancestral Empowerment, it doesn't replace itself. Adding more blues to our list does let us run more strong 1 and 2 cost cards to the main 60, which is exactly what Daniele did in Barcelona, running old favorites like Soaring Strike, Spreading Flames, and a 3rd copy of Command and Conquer, and Concealed Blade is a strong option to help pay for these cards. Now that we've seen the spiciest cards in Daniele's list, how can we add them to our own deck? For my part, I'm very interested in trying Bleed Out. I think the rationale for playing it is solid, and I'm in love with anything that lets me cut Ravenous Rabble from my deck. Bleed Out is consistent damage and should cost 0 more often than not. I do think that it will be an awkward card to draw in multiples, and taking Daniele's lead in playing 2 copies feels right to me, as opposed to playing a 3rd copy like we would play 3 Ravenous Rabbles. To make room for these 2 Bleed Outs, I intend to cut a copy of Ravenous Rabble and a copy of Ancestral Empowerment, which is another card I find awkward to draw in multiples. Which cards to cut for Censor is a harder decision and one that I'm going to delay for now. I think that Censor is very strong and I am interested in testing it, but it brings some meaningful downsides. Namely, it costs 1 and it doesn't have Go Again. For now, I don't want to make too many changes to my deck too quickly for fear of losing track of which ones are impactful and which ones aren't. But for my viewers who do want to utilize all this spicy tech at once, the cuts I recommend for Censor are your other 2 copies of Ravenous Rabble and your 3rd copy of Salt the Wound, really taking the lead from Daniele here. While you're playing, keep track of how often you can't effectively play out your hand. If you draw into too many 1 or 2 cost attacks that you can't pay for, that's a hint that you'll need to cut expensive cards or add more blue pitch to your deck. I'll be updating my deck lists and sideboard guides for your use soon, but for now, you'll notice that I usually cut 2 copies of Double Strike and 1 copy of Ancestral Empowerment when I board in Emberblade to make room for the blues to pay for that Emberblade. But moving forward, you'll want to cut both copies of Bleed Out and 1 copy of Bittering Thorns to make room for your blues. By pooling our experience, we can all build our best list together. So let me know in the comments how these new cards are working out for you. I do truly hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, and if you're going to use some of Daniele's tech in your deck, head jab that like button for me. My comments are always open if you have any questions or feedback. I'll be back tomorrow with more daily Fi gameplay, and keep in mind that an analysis of the post-Iyslander meta and Fi's space in it will be coming out on my channel later this week. But until then, take care.